night sky. It wasn't August 15th yet, but the moon that was shining above Philadelphia was already as bright as polished silver plate. There was a reason for it. The moon seen from Philadelphia looked different from that of other places around the country. Here, the moon appeared to be bigger and brighter, and the skies were clear most of the time, which was made for a great view. That's why it was common for the people of Philadelphia and those who visited to admire the moon in all its glory. Enjoying a picnic with friends under the moonlight in the summer days was as good a pastime as any. However, today was destined to be an extraordinary day. Under the bright moonlight, a number of awestruck men and women stood in the Strawberry Mansion Bridge, making their wishes and prayers as they watched meteors streak across the horizon. Among them was a handsome young boy who was holding on to the railing of the bridge with a frown on his face as he sighed. "I don't understand. Are you lying to me, Grandpa? You keep saying that this is an ancestral treasure, but I can't even tell what it's used for," he complained to his grandfather on the phone. The boy's name was James Lee. He had recently graduated university that year and, like most young graduates, he was struggling to find a job. He took another look at the small torn-up book he had in his hands, titled Celestial Medical Scriptures, and suddenly, James felt the impulse to cry out. The members of the Lee family had always been doctors, and they all specialized in traditional Chinese medicine. However, this ancient type of medicine had long been replaced by modern Western medicine, and it wasn't as popular nowadays, especially in the United States. After having moved all the way from China, James's grandfather had opened a Chinese pharmacy in Chinatown in Philadelphia and had poured all his hopes and dreams into it, but now he barely managed to make ends meet. Now his grandfather was like a bird which couldn't fly itself, so it nurtured offspring and wished they would fly instead. He placed all of his hopes on James. That's why he'd given him a medicine book claiming that it was a family treasure that had been passed down through generations by his ancestors, and hoped that James would study it well and revitalize the family's traditional medicine practice. He was the reason why James had majored in traditional Chinese medicine diagnostics at university. James had read the book, but found it useless. Actually, he didn't think anyone could learn anything from it. If it was really as useful and important as his grandfather claimed, why was it always used to support the legs of the wonky table at home? Was his grandfather just fooling him? Before him, the book had been passed down to his father by his grandfather. Unfortunately, not long after James was born, an unexpected car accident took his parents' lives. After the tragedy, James and his grandfather were left to rely on each other, so now the book was his. After his graduation, James had reached out to many hospitals to apply for a job. But when they came to know that he had only studied traditional Chinese medicine, they immediately rejected him, no questions asked. What James disliked the most and made him most uncomfortable during job interviews was that they often said something along the lines of, "Traditional Chinese medicine is useless. Do you even know how to operate on a patient?" For a while, everything that could go wrong went wrong in James's life, and it all happened at once. The lease for the apartment he rented expired, and he didn't have any money to pay, so the landlord threw his belongings out on the street. James begged the landlord to give him 3 more days to find another place to stay, but it was no use. Today was the 3rd day, and if he couldn't find a job soon, he would be sleeping on the streets by tomorrow. Thinking of all that had happened, James realized that his life had taken an unexpected dark turn, but he didn't know how to get out of such a bad situation. All of a sudden, he heard a shout. "Oh no! Someone's trying to jump into the river! Please help someone! Come quick!" When James heard the stranger's screams, he was stunned. He looked up in the direction of the voice. On the Strawberry Mansion Bridge about 10 meters away from him stood a woman in white with long dark hair that reached her waist. She was swaying with the wind and half of her body was leaning against the fence, which was not very high. Suddenly, James watched as the woman fell over the fence straight down into the water. "Damn!" James quickly told his grandfather he'd call him back and hung up the phone. In a matter of seconds, the bridge was packed with people that had watched the accident play out, so there was a loud chatter all around. Some kind-hearted people had already called the police and an ambulance. However, everyone had a hesitant look on their faces. None of them seemed to want to jump in after the woman to save her. James's eyes widened. This was a matter of life and death. Someone had to do something. As the responsible and compassionate young man he was, he decided to step up and try to help the poor woman. Besides, it didn't seem like she was attempting to commit suicide. It seemed like she had just fainted and fallen into the water. James squeezed through the crowd and looked down at the river. He couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. He now knew why no one wanted to go down. There was a warning sign not too far from where he stood that stated that it was recently discovered that the river was full of venomous water snakes. James looked at the struggling woman who was being carried away by the current and gritted his teeth. His luck could not be this bad. James gathered the medicine bag and his school bag in his hands and quickly asked the old lady next to him, "Please, "Please, keep my backpack with you. I'll go help her," and stuffed his things into the old lady's hands. Before she could agree, he mustered up the courage and jumped off the bridge. The crowd exclaimed when they saw him jump down to save the woman and admired how brave the young man was. They knew that if he was bitten by a snake, he might die. Admiration shone in their eyes. Not everyone had such courage. Of course, James didn't know what they were thinking. The moment he jumped down, he regretted it. He jumped without thinking much about it and had forgotten one important fact. He wasn't a very good swimmer whatsoever. Now, not only would he be unable to save someone, but he would most likely die in the process. The saddest part was that everyone watching would think that he was committing suicide. Before James could finish thinking, he fell into the river. He felt the shiver travel through his body as his skin touched the water. It was very cold. The very next moment, he felt the river rush into his mouth, and he sank deeper and deeper. Out on the bridge, no one was looking at James anymore. Instead, people were staring at the sky with their mouths wide open, watching as a shooting star was getting bigger and bigger as it approached, heading for the river. If it fell into the water, would the woman and James still have a chance to live? Unfortunately, the meteor did not stop its course and a few seconds later crashed right into the river. The water splashed out in the center, forming waves of about 7 to 8 meters in height. "This is bad. The girl and that young man are in danger." The crowd cried out in alarm. A meteor falling from the sky was already a very rare phenomenon, and no one had expected it to fall into the river. They were all worried. James was helplessly drowning, swallowed by the massive waves, their intensity too hard for him to overcome. All of a sudden, he felt a sharp pain in his back, as if something was entering his body, causing him to tremble. Then, without knowing where he'd gotten the strength from, he quickly moved his arms and swam to the surface. Once outside, James breathed in the fresh air in big gulps. He was overjoyed. By a stroke of luck, he had managed to gather his potential and learned how to swim. Although his swimming strokes were clumsier than a dog's, he now miraculously knew how to swim. Suddenly, James's face stiffened when he spotted a meter-long snake circling him. But before he could try to get away, he felt it bite his behind. James panicked. He was scared out of his wits. He hurriedly grabbed the snake by its tail, pulled it away from him, and threw it into the distance as far away as possible. The warning sign clearly stated that the snake was venomous and quite dangerous. How could he not panic? However, after a moment, James realized that he was fine. He didn't feel any symptoms of being poisoned. Could it be that the sign was wrong and the snake wasn't actually venomous? But that was impossible. James knew this type of snake. It was absolutely venomous and deadly. If a person was not rescued within half an hour of being bitten, they would die without a doubt. However, he seemed to be fine, which puzzled James very much. Could it be? Suddenly, the realization struck James, and he couldn't suppress the excitement he felt in his heart. He had been hit by a meteor while half unconscious, and something powerful had entered his body. Did that mean he was now a superhero like those he'd read about in comic books? Had the meteor given him superpowers? How else could he resist venom?